All politics is identity politics.
Welcome to Identity Politics, everyone. I'm DeAnna. As the late Joe Sobran said, the Constitution poses no serious threat to our form of government. Congress is incapable of legislating. The bureaucracy makes most of the decisions that actually affect your lives. The president could do whatever he wants in foreign policy, but he's not actually allowed to run his own executive department. And any decision that matters is basically made by judges whose names you can't pronounce and were just put there to meet some ethnic quota, just like the founders intended. Happy 250th anniversary, America. So when you have something that should be straightforward, like whether aliens admitted under a program called temporary protected status actually are allowed to stay here forever, somehow this becomes a Supreme Court case. And we know why. Most of what the art of government is in a democracy is politicians using misleading language and euphemisms to trick people about what's actually going on. And one of the reasons we no longer have a high trust society is not just because we've imported random third world clans, but also because our system of government selects for sociopaths, liars, and deluded narcissists. And it's partially our fault. I mean, in general, right, guys? Let's level here. If you tell people what's actually going on, a lot of times they get mad. But if you say, well, don't worry, it's not a big deal, they accept it. We're just doing this quick temporary thing to help people. It won't have any real impact. People go along with that. People believe what they want to believe. So if you told people all the way back in 2010, listen, we're going to import hundreds of thousands of people from the worst country on earth because, look, they feel sad or something, and they just get to be here forever, and you get to pay for everything. People would get mad. People would not like that. And it was a different country in 2010. Demographically, it was still pretty American. But if you frame it as, well, these people have it bad, and it's just for a little while, and they're going to go back soon, and it won't cost you anything, and it's not like they can vote. It's not like it's going to impact your politics. It's not going to impact your life. Why do you even care? White people, friendly, naive, well-meaning white people who think everyone else on earth is just like us. Everybody else treats people as individuals and lives by the golden rule. White people are going to fall for that. Their pastors and priests are going to tell them they have to do it. Their political leaders are going to tell them what the country's all about. And if they still have some misgivings about the wisdom of this course, well, some reporters will come along and call them racist and get them fired or attacked by Antifa. That's how it is. That's how it works. But then what do you get? Fast forward a decade and a half, you have hundreds of thousands of these people from Haiti. And now we are told they can't leave. We need them to work. We need them to buy stuff. And really, though they don't really say that, we're going to need them to vote. We're going to need to make them citizens. We're going to need to make them an ethnic bloc that will support us no matter what. We need them precisely because they don't really contribute anything to the country. And that's why they were brought here. And that's why it's a good thing, because it's revenge against you. I mean, compare and contrast here, guys. One of the things that the Trump administration deserves eternal credit for is making sure that white South Africans who are being persecuted by their government can come to the United States. Unlike most refugees that come here, they love the country, they're grateful, they actually have something to contribute. We may be getting a lot more of them. In fact, the New York Times reported not long ago that the Trump administration is considering a declaration that would allow us to bring in even more white refugees. So we get, under the headline, Trump administration weighs citing emergency to admit more Afrikaners as refugees. Now, as you can probably tell, just even from the framing there, the article is written by two Star Wars names and a hysterical female whose whole career has been shilling for non-white immigration. As you might expect, they are not happy about this potential decision. I mean, consider the tone here. Quote, Mr. Trump and his aides have claimed Afrikaners face racial persecution, an assertion strongly disputed by South African officials. Now the administration is weighing whether to expand the program by arguing that South Africa's response to Mr. Trump's claims of persecution, the rhetoric of political leaders, and what it calls the disruption of the Afrikaner refugee program constitute an emergency that requires resettling even more white minorities in the United States, according to officials who spoke on the condition of anonymity to describe internal discussions. The word choice there, claims. The South African government consciously discriminates against whites. This is not up for debate. If you're white, you just can't operate a business unless you're paying kickbacks to black officials or hiring them to just sit around. It can be difficult to defend yourself if you're under attack because the South African government imposed gun control. The situation on the farmsteads is a nightmare. Accounts of rape, murder, torture. that have nothing to do with any desire for material possessions. And the defense, insofar as there is one, is just, well, South Africa has a lot of crime and everybody suffers from that. Well, great. What a wonderful democracy. What a well-run country. Yeah, the Black African National Congress runs South Africa. And what are they going to do? Punish their voters? Punish the people stealing the copper from the power lines or something? They know their own people. They know what they're capable of. And the thing is, I suspect these Times reporters do too. They continue. The use of the emergency determination would be a major step in the president's effort to transform a program that for decades amounted to a pathway for those fleeing war, famine, and natural disaster around the globe, and turn it essentially into a pipeline for mostly white people hoping to immigrate to the United States. There are so many countries with very legitimate claims for refugees. All the doors are being slammed in all of their faces, says Elizabeth Shackelford, a former diplomat who worked in Poland, South Sudan, and Somalia before resigning in protest of Mr. Trump's first presidency. The reason for the sympathy from this administration is because it sends a very clear message. We will not tolerate white ethnic people being treated as if they are not special, unquote. Notice the way they delegitimize it. And notice the words. Again, what do you mean by refugees? Just think about what a refugee is. What does a refugee mean, if not a group of people specifically targeted by a government to be politically, economically, and physically punished? What is the situation of white South Africa? Like, what exactly are they supposed to do? They're going to vote their way out of it? It's a democracy as a tiny minority? No. And notice the way the very idea of mostly white people hoping to immigrate to the United States is pathologized. Why? What do you think this country is? What do you think an American is? How do you think we came to be? And consider their situation. We're talking about entire families being tortured to death in South Africa, with the government at best unable to stop it, at worst culpable and approving. It's not like this issue hasn't gotten attention. It's not like it hasn't been investigated. It's not like people don't know what's going on. It's just a question of whether you approve of it or not. By the way, this is Elizabeth Shackelford's picture from her website. And yeah, just one look at her. You already know every opinion she's ever had and will have. Oh, the white South Africans are just upset because they're not being treated special. No, they are being treated special. That's the problem. They are specially designated for economic discrimination, violent crime, and political persecution in a country where they have no collective power and can never have any collective power because the whole point of the modern regime is to screw them over. They are the ideal refugees by any definition, but she's outraged by this. And she's not alone. Remember, wasn't that long ago. Let's go back a few months. This from the Episcopal News Network. The Episcopalian Church, you all remember this, said it would rather shut down its program rather than assist white South Africans with resettlement. That's how much they hate you. The headline, Episcopal Church will not resettle white South Africans favored by Trump, presiding bishop says. Quote, Episcopal Migration Ministries has resettled nearly 110,000 such refugees over nearly 40 years, but in light of our church's steadfast commitment to racial justice and reconciliation and our historic ties with the Anglican Church of Southern Africa, we are not able to take the step of assisting the Trump administration in resettling Afrikaners, presiding Bishop Sean Rowe said after consulting with Anglican Archbishop Thabo Mukogaba of Cape Town. Yes, the noted spiritual leader. Instead, the Episcopal Church will formally end all federal resettlement work when its contract expires at the end of this fiscal year on September 30th. EMM, after further reducing its staff, will continue operating as a church-based ministry to serve the needs of refugees already in the U.S., as well as asylum seekers and other migrants, unquote. That from 2025. So when people say, oh, it's suicidal empathy. No. These are just silly women. They're so compassionate. They can't help it. No. They would literally rather shut down and fire all their friends than help white people. Think how deep that hatred goes. And why are they hated? Why are white people hated so much? Why don't they want white people coming into this country? Precisely because these people are going to be competent. They're going to assimilate. They're going to contribute. They're going to be Americans. That's why they're hated. To compare them to the type of people we usually bring in, the Daily Wire of all things, revealed that these white South African refugees were stunned by the orientation videos they were shown upon arrival. The headline is, taxpayer-funded cultural orientation program teaches refugees how to shower and use a toilet. Quote, when South African refugees were told they would be shown videos on how to assimilate to American culture, they expected a crash course in local customs and habits they may not have known. Instead, they sat wide-eyed as they watched videos teaching them how to shower, use a toilet, and brush their teeth. When we were watching it, we laughed a lot at these videos and made comedic remarks because they pointed out the obvious regarding not going to the bathroom outside and how to use a microwave even, said Adrian, an Afrikaner refugee who arrived in December. We found it very funny, but we understood as well the idea of like people from Somalia who've never had electricity. They were mostly made for people that can't speak English, that have never lived in a first world country, unquote. Now think about that. It's funny, but that tells you a lot about the type of people the government usually wants to airdrop on your hometown, doesn't it? And judging from the state of a lot of our cities and neighborhoods where these people end up settling, these videos teaching them to wash themselves and not throw trash everywhere, not to poop on the street, they're not really doing the job. And this is the key difference. When we say something like refugee or asylum seeker, what do we mean? In theory, and I think this is the way most of us continue to think about it, we think about someone who could be productive, who could lead a normal life, who could have a job and a family in their own country, but then something extraordinary happens, right? Like something bad happens. It might be a regime that specifically goes after their ethnic or religious group, but then that regime goes away. And then once that happens, there's no reason they can't go back. Oh, there's a natural disaster. Sure. Okay. Yeah, they have to go somewhere. That seems reasonable, but for how long? I mean, natural disasters happen everywhere. If tornadoes hit Kansas, do all 3 million people in Kansas have the right to go to, say, Lithuania, where they would outnumber the natives and just replace them? No, of course not. That's ridiculous. At some point, a society has to recover from the disasters inflicted upon it. You can't just say, well, something bad happened, so now we just get to move wherever we want. And more to the point, if you have people in a country, particularly a country that waged a very violent struggle to secure independence and won't shut up about it and won't stop bragging about it, do those people have the right to leave because their country is apparently unlivable? No, because if we think about this for 5 seconds, what this actually proves is that the country should not be independent. It can't govern itself. It can't build a society that even its own people are willing to accept. In reality, it probably needs to be colonized for its own good. And if the people leave this failed state, wherever they go, they're just going to recreate the conditions. Why? Because a nation is its people. Whether you have Anglos in England, frozen Canada, sunny Rhodesia, or in Australia or New Zealand, they're going to create societies that all work and all kind of look the same and all kind of operate the same way, regardless of geography and whatever obstacles and natives they encounter. This isn't complicated. This is very obvious. At some level, everyone knows this. But what do we have in this country? We have this thing called temporary protected status. Now, as you might be able to tell by its name, although some certain Supreme Court justices can't, it's not supposed to be permanent. What is the advantage here for someone who is trying to bring in more migrants? Again, think about the idea of using euphemism. In theory, now you don't have to justify why these people need to be here forever. They're here because of a disaster, because of some temporary political instability, because there's a crisis. But don't worry. It's all going to be over someday. You don't have to think about it too much. But then what if it never goes away? And then we even get some arguments about this, and you see how it changes, how it questions the premise. One, what if, once they're here, we're suddenly told, well, now they have jobs. Now they have connections. Now they have friends. So now they have a right to be here. It would be cruel to send them away. Well, if that's how it works, there's no reason to ever bring anyone here for any reason, because almost by definition, you'll never be allowed to make anyone leave. Friend comes by, is like, hey, can I stay on your couch for a week? Yeah, sure. Hey, a week goes by. Yeah, but you know what? I like your Xbox, so I just live here now. Oh, okay. Seems reasonable. Is that how it works? Think of another thing. Like, oh, well, the place that they're from is still terrible. You can't just send them back. It's terrible there. Well, if that's the case, it's not a temporary emergency, is it? It's the people themselves. And that's a much more deep-seated problem. In fact, as long as this people exists, it's always going to be in a situation of permanent crisis. And if you import the people, you're not solving their problem. You're not even really helping them. You're just spreading the crisis. And now we have to deal with the crisis. And another argument, and we'll get to this in a second, they say, well, these people are here, but now the people in America don't like them. They're causing problems. They're making life difficult for the people. Well, what kind of problems? What do you mean? Well, let's say something hypothetically like they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, they're eating the pets of the people that live there. Something like that. Well, it turns out if people think that's what's happening, because they're upset, because Americans are upset, Now you especially can't send them back. It's precisely because people are mad about what these migrants are doing or what they think they might be doing that they must have an inherent right to be in this place forever. Because any control over your own community or whether you get to have a community at all is, of course, secondary to the sacred importance of equality. Sounds absurd, right? This is what the Supreme Court was arguing about. This is the specific thing that was brought up. This is what the case revolved around. NPR reports, the headline, Trump can begin deportations of Syrian, Haitian TPS holders, Supreme Court says. Now, let's just look at these two groups. Why are Syrians here? Oh, the Syrian civil war, the evil government of Assad, so they say. Oh, so unstable, what do we do? Remember, this is what the whole European refugee crisis a decade ago started over, right? What are we going to do? These poor people. What, you expect these military-age males to fight for their country instead of getting food stamps from you? How could you? No, yeah, we've heard it all. Fine. But the Syrian civil war is over. Assad is in Moscow gaining somewhere. You got a Western-blessed government in Damascus. What's the reason they can't go back? Well, they just don't want to. Okay. Well, then why can't we just ignore all that stuff we heard before? And then think of Haiti. What's the problem there? Well, you see, there was an earthquake in 2010. Okay. There was an earthquake 16 years ago. Well, it's been 16 years. Now what? And again, think about how this was sold at the time. It's temporary. It's not a big deal. There's going to be all sorts of conditions. It's very strict. Don't be paranoid. No, this is not me like after the fact saying, well, they sold it to you lie. Let's get it straight from the source. This is then DHS Secretary Janet Napolitano with then Vice President Joe Biden standing right behind her, giving us that message.
Lastly, as has been widely reported yesterday, I signed the order beginning for the process of TPS status for Haitians already in the United States. This is a kind of an intermediate immigration status that allows those who are here to remain and to work. And as they work, of course, many send remittances back home. This in and of itself is a form of support to Haiti and a form of economic assistance to Haiti. To qualify, you must have been in the United States before January the 12th, the date of the earthquake. It will be good for 18 months from the date of the issuance, so that will be in July of 2011. So for Haitians in the country who were here before the earthquake, we are now opening up the process of TPS, that intermediate immigration status for you.
Oh, don't worry. It'll just be 18 months. It's fine. 18 months. Yeah. It's 16 years later now. What's the argument here? Too soon? When is it not? 25 years, 50, 100? And if the answer is never, why is there a Haiti? Shouldn't we just make Haiti Saint-Domingue again? I mean, that wouldn't quite fit on a hat, but it might be a sound geopolitical strategy. In any event, NPR tells us, and look at how they frame the arguments here. Quote, the Supreme Court gave the Trump administration the green light to begin mass deportations of people who have been living and working legally in the United States for years, some even decades. By a 6-3 vote along ideological lines, the court's conservative majority ruled that the president has virtually unrestrained power to end the temporary protected status program known as TPS. Congress enacted the TPS law in 1990 to allow fully vetted and eligible migrants to live and work legally in the U.S. if they cannot return safely to their home countries because of natural disasters, armed conflicts, and other extraordinary conditions, unquote. Now stop there. Living and working legally in the United States for years, even decades, doesn't that by itself justify scrapping the entire program, which hasn't been around all that long? We're told, oh, extraordinary conditions. Well, extraordinary conditions, by definition, don't last for decades. You know what we call them when they last for decades? Ordinary conditions, the way things are. And here's the worst part. There wasn't much serious discussion about whether the president actually had the right to end it in terms of his inherent power. Of course he does. I mean, if he doesn't, who does? It comes from the Department of Homeland Security, part of the executive branch, obviously the president. The arguments were about whether President Trump specifically, him specifically, is allowed to end it because he had said mean things in the past about Haiti and Haitians. I am not making this up. Quote, Writing for the court's conservatives, Justice Samuel Alito said TPS statute bars any court review of how the president and his Department of Homeland Security have used their authority to end TPS status. I mean, that should settle it. At the same time, he also rejected the Haitian separate constitutional claim that the decision to eject them from the country was based on racial prejudice. Political discourse by prominent public figures is increasingly couched in terms that would have scandalized the public just a short time ago, Alito said. But whatever one may think of those statements, they are insufficient to show that the termination of Haiti's TPS designations was based on the race of the Haitian people. Writing for the liberal dissenters, Justice Elena Kagan lambasted that claim, saying the evidence is there, plain to see in the president's own statements, which even his own lawyers cannot bear to repeat in court, statements that she quoted at length in which Trump referred to Haiti as a filthy, dirty, disgusting shithole country, his debunked claims that Haitians living in the United States were eating their neighbors' pets debunked, and his assertions that Haitians are poisoning the blood of the country they are, in addition to his repeated comments asking, why can't we have more people from Norway and Sweden? Unquote. Why indeed? I think a lot of us are wondering that. Here's my argument. Why isn't all this another reason to keep Haitians out? Why would this be a reason to keep them in? Isn't it precisely because they're from a third world country that is racially distinct from the historic American majority that there should be extra barriers to letting them in? And more to the point, let's not disguise ourselves what Haiti is. The whole point of the country, the founding myth, is we slaughtered the white people. This is a black country. We run the show. This is our history. We're proud of it. This happened not long after our own revolution. The founding fathers knew all about Saint-Domingue and Haiti. They were scared of it. They knew exactly what this meant for the South. If you want to know why the Southern states in the later Confederacy were so terrified of abolitionism, so ready to go to war, it's because they remembered what happened to Saint-Domingue and all the people there. Even people who weren't supporters of slavery did not relish the idea of a slave insurrection where their entire family is going to be killed. And they accurately knew that even the people who were promoting abolition were not so much interested in ending slavery or helping blacks, but they got off on the idea of being able to kill white people they didn't like. The white genocide was an inspiration to them. It continues to be, like this sign from 2020, which reads, Haiti did it in 1804. This is just round two. We got you. And so it is. That was from June 2020 in Boston. Here's the thing you need to understand about Haitian history. It wasn't blacks just rose up one day and slaughtered everyone. That never works. That's not what happened. The Haitian Revolution took place over a very long period of time, and every single political coalition and solution you're wondering about, they tried it. Oh, we're going to end slavery and make these guys citizens of France. Yeah, they did that. It was a white French commissioner in Haiti named Saint-Domingue who did that. Oh, we're going to put the blacks in charge as long as they're loyal to France. Yeah, they did that. They tried civic nationalism. Oh, we're going to get rid of racial distinctions legally. We're all Frenchmen. We're all part of France. Yeah, they did that. None of it worked. It's a complex story, and yet really, it's actually really simple. Race exists. The different races have different interests, mindsets, grievances. It's practically inevitable that the Haitian Revolution could only have led to the white population being wiped out and the creation of a black kleptocracy that's endured for 200 years. Like whatever clever legal arguments or philosophical tricks you try, they're all going to crash upon racial and biological and historical realities. And here we are again. And yet we just keep doing it over and over again. Haiti is the way it is because it's filled with Haitians. And if you have a country that is defined by the founding myth of we killed the white people, why exactly should we let these people in?
Hello, President Trump. I'm Haitian. You know what I'm saying? You need fucking move your shit, ambassador in Haiti. You know what I'm saying? Haitian, I don't play. I don't have problem. Whatever Haitian want to go Haiti, you need move your shit, ambassador in Haiti. Fuck you, bitch.
Just what we need, right? More people like that guy. Well, you don't understand. They don't think like that anymore. They're just like everybody else. Okay, well, let's get to the heart of the matter. Is President Trump not right when he called it a dirty shithole country? In fact, aren't we told right now that the reason we can't send these people back is precisely because it's a dirty shithole country? So here's Jake Tapper. He's complaining to the current Department of Homeland Security Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen.
The reason I ask is because I heard Stephen Miller, who's driving a lot of this, say that Haiti is safe for Haitians. And I just looked at the State Department's website, And they have a level 4 do not travel advisory for Haiti just from a few months ago, from April, and it says, quote, violent crime is rampant. The expansion of gang, organized crime, and terrorist activity has led to widespread violence. Crimes involving firearms are common. Crimes include robbery, carjacking, sexual assault, and kidnappings for ransom. That doesn't sound safe to me.
Well, that do not travel is not for Haitians. That's do not travel for the United States, because they are kidnapping or trying to kidnap individuals from the United States because they feel like their family has the money to pay the ransom.
Think of the argument here. Think of that. Shitlibs think this is really persuasive. Like the great and the good are like, oh, yes, they're nodding solemnly and furrowing their brows and everything else. They think there's a lot of crime in Haiti. You can't send them back. Yeah, there's a lot of crime in East St. Louis too, and Baltimore and Oakland and Memphis. See if you can figure out what the common factor might be. And yeah, as the DHS secretary said, as an American, it's not a good reason to go there because you'll get kidnapped for ransom. But there's a bigger question. Isn't the fact that Haiti has a lot of crime and is apparently so dangerous that we are not allowed to send these people back to their own country, doesn't that mean that country shouldn't exist? I mean, don't take it from me. Democratic Representative Frederica Wilson, back in January of this year.
And they are terrorized. They're terrorized. Haitian nationals. This is cruelty. This is inhumane. And this is a death sentence. Because we already know the consequences. Because in Haiti, there's open warfare and rape. There's ravaging violence against women and children. There are no school days, no work schedule. You do what the gangs want you to do.
To merely be in one's own country is a death sentence. It's full of warfare, rape, violence. One might even call it a shithole. Is the standard that we must accept everyone from these terrible countries precisely because they are terrible countries? And then because they are terrible, because they were literally founded on murderous anti-white violence? And that's the reason we need to bring them here? What are we saying? And I know some people are like, okay, murderous anti-white violence, it was a slave revolt. Sure, but it wasn't just that. There was a whole process. There were all sorts of different alternatives. And by the way, the leaders of the Haitian Revolution were quite happy to preside over a labor system when all is said and done that was not much different from what existed under the worst excesses of French colonialism. So don't give me the anti-slavery or social justice argument. At the end of the day, when you look at how it actually played out, it ultimately just came down to, we don't want the whites here. We want to be the ones running the plantations. And that was enough. And that's how it always is. And do these people even contribute? We hear this too. To ask the question is to answer it. The Center for Immigration Studies reported on April 10, 2024 that of households headed by Haitian immigrants, 52.7% use at least one major welfare program. Under a 1980 law, which applies to them and Cubans, if Haitians can get paroled into the country, they get sooner eligibility for certain welfare programs like refugee cash and medical assistance, immigration and job placement, Medicaid, food stamps, Social Security. Pretty sweet deal. Do you get any of that? No, you get nothing. Do we even get gratitude? No. In fact, we are told that Haitians of all people actually built the country.
This is the time for all of us to raise our voices and to say this country is also our country, is also the country of our immigrants, because we are the one who built it.
Incidentally, that was somebody named Geraldi Gabibu, heading another one of these endless organizations that demand these migrants get more of your money, rally in Massachusetts. Not surprising that the people who financially and politically benefit from all this want it to continue. But here's the thing. We can't just say, well, it's the radical left. It's the Dumbocrats. Your liberals are at it again. No. Look at Ohio Governor Mike DeWine, Republican. He's out there giving the same kind of argument. Oh, you can't send them back. It would be inhumane.
Governor, you just heard Secretary Mullen defend the decision. You say it's a mistake. What's your take?
Well, I think it's a mistake for a number of reasons. First of all, to go back to what you were just discussing, you cannot fly into Port-au-Prince today. U.S. carriers are prohibited from going in there. They've extended that ban. Federal officials in the United States have extended that ban into September now, and it's been there for a long time. The reason they can't go in there is because these gang leaders who control a good part of Haiti today shoot at the planes when they come in. So that's certainly one thing. You've pointed out, advisories heavy advisories. U.S. citizens do not go into Haiti. It's a very, very dangerous place. Just this last week, several more school children were killed just because gangs were shooting back and forth. The gangs control a significant part of Haiti. So it is clearly not safe. Anybody who has followed Haiti over a long, extended period of time knows that it's worse than it has, frankly, ever been, and certainly in recent memory.
It's worse than it's ever been. It's worse than it's ever been. Really? Think of the way this self-discredits the entire thing. It's temporary, but you can't send them back. Actually, it's worse than it's ever been. Well, then why is Haiti there? What are we doing here? There's no government. There's no administration. What is the argument for any of this continuing? Unless we just blame the left or something, it's the cheap labor Republicans who want this to keep going. I mean, here's him again.
The two Ohio congressmen who have probably the most Haitians, the Republicans who have the most Haitians in their district, voted in favor of the extension of TPS. So what I would hope that the Trump administration would do is reconsider this. Look at how it's going to impact states like Ohio. In Ohio, the Haitians are working primarily in manufacturing. They're also working in the food area. But if you look at where they're working across the country, probably the most important area they're working is in healthcare. It's Haitians who many times are taking care of your mom or your dad who has Alzheimer's.
No, you don't understand. It's the Haitians taking care of your mom or dad who has Alzheimer's. That sounds like a threat to me. I mean, I wonder if this guy's going to end up that way not too long from now. Oh, they're working. Oh, God, our whole economy depends upon these people. No, this is cheap labor subsidized by you. This is an estate that was deliberately deindustrialized for decades. Jobs shipped away. The whole point of the Trump movement was to reverse this process. But not only are we not going to do that, we are going to bring in Haitians to take the few jobs that are left because they can work for less, because they get income you don't. And best of all, we're going to do it all under a program that was sold to you as temporary. 18 months, right? 16 years later, because of an earthquake, here we are. One thing you have to give President Donald Trump credit for is he has revealed so many of these Republicans for what they always were. Think of John Kasich. This was a guy who thought he could be president. Oh, I'm a moderate. Oh, shucks, I'm a son of the Midwest. I don't know anything about these issues. I'm no better than anyone. Deindustrialization of his state, the fentanyl crisis, wholesale collapse of the urban centers because of feral blacks. Who cares? But Haitians have to go back? Now he's mad. Now he's angry. Now he has to find a camera. Now we get this.
The Supreme Court decision has said that Haitians are going to have to be removed from Springfield, Ohio. I guess I understand that, but there is an opportunity for the Congress to extend temporary protection status because things in Haiti are just deteriorating, and sending people back there with their families, to me, is just crazy. I wish the Congress would extend this for the Haitians, but if not, they'll say that that's the law. And to quote somebody, a figure from a Charles Dickens novel, if that's the law, then the law is an ass.
Just the phenotype alone, the expressions, just the performative weakness, it's sickening. It's nauseating. Like, this is a type. These are the people who gave your country away. It's their fault. People who look like this, people who act like this. Don't get me wrong. There are other people who are in charge who are far more conniving and malicious. But somehow I hate the traitors more because they disguise their material greed in this performative weakness. Oh, Haiti is too dangerous to send them home. Well, then Haiti shouldn't be a country, should it? We could send Eric Prince and like 250 guys, and Haiti would have the best government it's had in 2 centuries. But no one actually wants to do that. No one actually wants to help the country. And Kasich, God knows, doesn't want to help this country. I mean, it's funny he calls Charles Dickens because Dickens had this phrase, telescopic philanthropy, that describes this scum personally. They don't care about their own people. They don't care about their own community. They probably get off feeling superior to them. But some hapless blacks in a place far away, now we hear about Christianity. Now we hear about duty. Now we hear about morality. Now we hear about what we're obligated to do. It's all performative. It's all status seeking. It's all fake. Now, the administration has said, and I know a lot of you guys are talking about it, that everyone whose TPS status has been revoked can apply for a visa. Oh, so nobody's going back. Well, you recall Kristi Noem, when she was DHS secretary, said the same thing about the Venezuelans, and most of those visas didn't get approved, and then they get sent back. This is something they have to say because this is how the law works. Anybody can apply for this. You could argue moderate rhetoric, extreme results is the best combination. That's better than performative extremism as far as I'm concerned. But time will tell. I mean, this is not something where you can be like, well, they said it'll this and it'll just be fine. We'll see, won't we? But no, this isn't the end of all things. No, this doesn't necessarily mean they're all staying there. If you look objectively at how many of these visas are being approved, given the last few years, it's not very many. I think 90% are being denied. Probably less when it comes to these guys. So take that for what it is. But the fact it even has to be brought up tells us something, doesn't it? Like, why can't we just say, like, yeah, obviously, blanket dismissal? Why do we have to go through this? We can't talk honestly about any of the problems we have in this country. The policy consequences, the intent, why this is being done to us. Everything is couched in these euphemisms and lies and half-truths. TPS was always a program to smuggle in as many non-whites to the country as possible. That's what it was for, whatever excuses were offered. The point is to have subsidized cheap labor for Republicans and votes and angry non-whites for Democrats for their political ends. No one actually thinks it's good for the country. If they thought it was good for the country, they'd be mad about it, just like they're mad about white South Africans coming here. A country is its people. Haiti is the way it is because it's full of Haitians. And if America is full of Haitians, then that's what America will be. Everyone involved knows this. That's why they are doing it. And when they appeal to your morality, understand it's a cover for their interests. This is not empathy. It's sadism. And your future depends on your ability to see through it. Hey guys, quick reminder before we continue. You can follow Identity Politics on Rumble, Odyssey, YouTube, X, and TikTok. And if you want to make sure you never miss an episode, sign up for our email list. If you believe in this work and you want to help us stay fully independent, you can support us directly on Ko-Fi. We offer bronze, silver, gold, and white membership tiers, or you can give a one-time contribution, whatever works for you. Every bit of support helps fund production, research, and our ability to speak freely without corporate or platform pressure. All the links are in the description below. Now back to the show. My guest today is Nativist Concern. You may know him as Ryan, co-host with Keith Woods on the talk show Continuum from Europa.com. One of the most important voices in our movement, trying to give it some real intellectual depth and a serious agenda. A real pleasure to welcome him to Identity Politics. Check it out. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us here today on Identity Politics. I've been really enjoying your show with Keith.
Yeah, it's good to be here. I've followed your work for many years myself and big fan of Amren and your articles, and glad you're enjoying the work that Keith and I decided to embark on lately. I think it was kind of born out of a concern for the way things have gone in recent years with the growth and evolution of the movement into this kind of online new ecosystem.
Well, let's get into that right away, because it's something I've thought about a lot too. Because on the one hand, things are better than ever, right? I mean, you have a mass constituency in a way that you didn't have before. Even the most quote unquote extreme ideas, you can practically make a living just talking about these sorts of things. In some ways, it's actually easier to be more extreme. And you're not going to deal with as much censorship as even a more moderate group like a lot of these European political parties, or maybe even Amren has to deal with every once in a while. Certainly, there's a market for conspiracy stuff, which traditionally has been the home, at least in America, where radical right ideas could sort of be smuggled out through. I mean, conspiracy was sort of like the way you could get these ideas in. And now people are talking about it even more. And even if you just look at the comment threads on typical news articles or on Facebook or on anything else, I mean, we're seeing a level of red pilling, so to speak, that is far beyond anything anybody was dreaming of in 2016. And yet, at the same time, I mean, let's be honest, it's dumber than ever. Is this just how it has to be? Because, look, at some level, you almost can't even complain about it, because mass politics is about the masses, and everything ultimately does have to be brought down to the level of a slogan. And if you want to move the masses, to some extent, you do have to simplify these ideas to just one basic thing.
Yeah, I mean, I was saying to Keith in recent weeks, I just think we have to accept that people are fundamentally religious, and they are going to keep spewing the same kind of schizo takes again and again on our side. And really our job is to kind of dismiss it, but not totally isolate ourselves from these people, present the real ideology in as distilled form as possible, and keep moving things our way through, good content and the distribution of it. I mean, Elon Musk opened a lot of doors. It's almost unthinkable that the world's richest man on paper would become this kind of. I mean, it's also almost on the edge of Fed posting now.
With that new movie, yeah.
I'm not sure even this latest turn is a good thing, because it might compel European powers to, even try and ban X. But yeah, it's interesting. I've seen a lot of normie type people come a long way and start talking in a radical right way. And I think ultimately people align themselves with systems. And if we can present the best system and people are willing to sacrifice to put us in, our movement in a position that we can seize political power, then we win. It's just a question of how we get there. And, a lot of the show's purpose is to have this neurological analysis, psychological analysis, to really get down to the grassroots of what's driving society, the power brokers involved, and how we can turn it to our advantage for, the purpose of good politics and, ethno-homogenous countries, which, we believe is the ultimate good.
It's interesting that you bring up the idea of a system and how this can take us to state conquest, because if you think of the Republicans in the United States, and this is something that I think a lot of people who are both aligned with President Trump and who are critics of President Trump would agree with. It's certainly true, actually, of a lot of President Trump's most vocal critics within the GOP. They're more guilty of this than President Trump is, if he's guilty of it, is this sort of magical thinking where you just kind of like take an issue, you go out there, you make sort of a sensational claim on social media, and then that becomes the actual political action. Like that's what you do instead of doing something. I mean, to use a kind of stupid example, we saw that pointing meme from the WNBA with the white girl pointing at I think Sophie Cunningham's her name, pointing at that black girl, and that became a meme. And I saw Dr. Rand Paul said something like, I guess he's not a doctor. Rand Paul said something like, oh, this is me calling Fauci before Congress. And it's like, what is the point of this? You're in power now. We all kind of know that nothing's going to happen. It's just sort of a performative gesture. We say, oh, there's hearings coming. There's going to be action. We're exposing these things, but exposing things by themselves is not actually exercising power. It's just propaganda, and it's supposed to lead to something. But then you actually have guys who are in power, especially if you look at the Republicans in Congress, and they don't actually do anything with it. And yet they keep talking and saying things like, don't you understand that the Democrats are trying to bring in these immigrants to replace you in your country? Don't you understand that they're bringing in all these dangerous people? And it's like, you're in Congress. Why are you telling me about this? Like, you were put there for a reason. And I sort of feel like this is what happens with a lot of right-wing movements.
Yeah, I think the most pertinent example of that was the first Trump administration, when we had all the social media censorship, and they just decided to do nothing about it. Right. And there's this constant cope about the right-wing establishment party allegedly being on the side of white people, when people like the Koch brothers were bringing in as many immigrants as leftists. And really it comes down to the value system of Americanism. Your state is defined legally as a creedal nation, and the right of individuals to own property. And I have big criticisms of social contract theory in itself. I think it separates us into property owners. It encourages people to think as individuals and as greedy individuals. And economic growth becomes the only measure of success, and it has all these other downstream consequences. So, as a movement, I'm very keen for us to embrace more German philosophy and the idea of an organic nation,
right?
And also, fascist ideas as well. So I think, there's internal contradictions within the American system that makes it very hard for people to think outside of it.
And yet, some of the people who have emerged out of America, I'm thinking Francis Parker Yockey is probably the greatest critic that emerged of the American system and the greatest proponent of an independent European course. But of course, at the end of the day, he was an American. And a lot of the movements in America that have been coming up take a lot of inspiration from the European New Right and talk about these kinds of ideas. And even President Trump, rhetorically, if not quite in policy, not that he can govern as a dictator even if he wanted to, but he's been sort of hinting at these ideas of, well, we're an empire now. We are going to be governed as this great nation. It's not just about the individual. I'm a nationalist. I'm not a conservative. This is the sort of thing he's said in the past. If you look at where the American right is going compared to, say, even 15 years ago, it's in a vastly different place. So just speaking from an American perspective, is it a bit reductionist to say, look, America is somehow doomed to this sort of individualist analysis that prevents you from going where you need to get to politically? Because, I mean, Europe, if you look at the leadership of the European Commission, for example, they're not really saying anything different than what typical Democrats say in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, to use Yockey as an example, he's obviously derives a lot of his work from Spengler, and Spengler makes this split between the two kind of European mentalities, the English individualist merchant and the European German bureaucracy. And I guess that's kind of playing out at the moment. Like, the EU is just very attached to its idea of like a bureaucratic superstate. It works in some ways, but is beholden to American influence and, this kind of thing. But yeah, I definitely think America has advantages that can be taken advantage of from a nationalist perspective. For a start, its huge landmass makes it very difficult to rule as a central authority. And, there is this opportunity to just kind of check out into new ethno communities, as Arvo is attempting. I hope he's successful legally.
Right.
Things are changing metapolitically, and people are starting to see themselves as separate nations again. So, it's up to us to encourage these memes, encourage people to think outside of, what's gone before and constantly turn things to our advantage. And I think America is showing good signs of that with the deportations that are going on. And, what was it, $50 billion attributed to Department of Homeland Security. And, those X accounts are now, doing our kind of memes in terms of deportation. So, yeah, there are reasons to be positive, and I certainly haven't given up on America. I mean, it's really important that America turns back to its Western roots.
Well, obviously, we also have our problems here. I mean, because, as you pointed out, just the fact that it's so big and our system of checks and balances in many ways makes what we're trying to do much more difficult. We'll talk about the UK in a second, but if you had a right-wing government in the UK, in theory, because of parliamentary supremacy, you could turn the whole country around overnight. I mean, you just have that kind of authority. In America, you don't really have that. And so every time they try to do something, you have a million judges stepping up, you have the states getting in the way, and this is a real frustration when it comes to something like mass deportations. You could argue that the Trump administration needs to go farther, but there are all these obstacles there. The question becomes, what can one do in terms of a reformist mindset? Because I think the biggest debate right now is that you can say, well, we've made all this growth and we're getting these sort of rhetorical nods and winks from the Trump administration. We're like, hey, guys, we're reading you on Twitter or whatever else. And a lot of people then think, well, this means we're in power. We're politically relevant. But then if you take a step back, it's like, look, the numbers are not there to really shift what's going on at a fundamental level. Like in 20 years, we still end up at the same place. And by the way, that assumes that they somehow win in 2028 and this just keeps going. And you don't get the Democrats in there and just legalize everybody immediately. So I think people then conclude, well, why participate at all? Why even bother with any of this? The system is inherently rigged. And then you latch on to whatever vanguard solution catches your fancy. I think this seems to be the main difference between the alt-right as was in 2016, where people were really excited about the idea of taking over the government and doing stuff, and the dissident right as exists today, where I think it's more about arguments why you shouldn't get involved in politics because it's doomed to failure and why you need to pursue this alternative course outside the state.
Yeah. I mean, I think we should pursue both strategies. I mean, it's important that we have, nationalists in law. It's important that, this kind of national idea, if Musk truly supports it, for example, he's a critic of the DAs that get bought out by Soros. But what's stopping him creating or funding right-wing lawyers? I mean, especially the Anglosphere is very based on legalism. It's kind of like wired into our neurology. Schmidt was very critical of this, way that the law becomes a kind of divine entity in itself, and it encourages people to think very systemically and incredibly rigidly. So, yeah, I mean, we should be pushing in every direction, but I agree with you that there is this problem in the online ecosystem where you do get these people just grifting attention. They're not really thinking about how to change the system. And so much of the online attention and potential human capital is being diverted away from what really matters.
Yeah, there is a role, I think, Jonathan Bowden famously spoke on vanguardism, and I think there's a valuable role for vanguardism. I certainly don't dissuade people from being in a vanguard or building parallel structures or all these sorts of things. I mean, you referred to one before, but the Return to the Land Project and sort of thing. But there's always the question of motivation, right? And that can be tough because you can't read somebody's mind. And sometimes, oh yeah, like I've got this retarded idea. Well, I actually believe in it. What now? I mean, you sometimes have this issue where people say things that are counterproductive or you think are counterproductive, but they do really believe it. And they're operating in good faith. And then on the other hand, you have people who are obviously in this just to make a buck. And sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between the two. I mean, in your experience, what do you look for when you say, okay, this is a trustworthy authority, this is a voice worth listening to?
Basically, that they've demonstrated over a period of time that they're interested in the collective good above themselves. And they're willing to sacrifice their personal position. They're willing to read. They're willing to cooperate. And frankly, I've only found a few, like a handful of these people within the movement over the last decade. But yeah, I try and, promote and cooperate with those people as much as possible. And if I think someone's taken advantage of the situation to grift or subvert, then I usually call them out. That has caused me to be, ostracized from some circles, and I tend to be a bit of a Puritan on who I cooperate with. But I think you need strong brand and strong signaling to not, dilute your message and send attention in other directions. And I think we need to do a better job of it in general. Particularly international cooperation in Europe can be quite hard to organize. People have, different legal systems they have to adhere to. There are different animosities between neighboring states, language barriers, of course. So, I've always been in favor of cooperating with the heroic individuals that have shown propensity to sacrifice for collective good and really have the revolutionary zeal to achieve things.
I know it's always kind of a grass is always greener situation. I'm sure a lot of Europeans actually look at America and say, oh, I wish we had their situation, where a lot of Americans look at Europe and say, oh, man, I wish we had their situation as far as the nationalist movements go. A lot of people were really pumped up by the Remigration Summit. A lot of people are looking with a lot of hope to some of the nationalist parties that seem to be surging. I think a party that explicitly endorses remigration is at 40%, I believe. It was the FPO in Austria. And so you have parties that are relevant and yet still radical, or radical enough that we can count on productive results. What's your read on the European situation right now? Because it does seem, and this is just an American perspective, it's very parochial, that in many ways the movement is much more serious in some ways than what's become of the right here in America.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I try to psychoanalyze nations. So, my reading of Austria is it's very aristocratic. I mean, a lot of people will put them in the same kind of bracket as Germany. I actually think psychologically they're quite different. It's a former empire. It still has evidence of the empire within Vienna. It's got many Serbs, Hungarians, Slovaks. Unfortunately, people from further afield now, like Turkey. But credit to Martin Sellner, he has been very active in his home country. He's built a movement, and he's, co-opted this, proud aristocratic sentiment and led a party to 40% in the polls, which is, actively pursuing remigration. The FBO have been on the edge of gaining government before, but they were betrayed by another conservative right party. But hopefully this time it's for real, and they'll be able to put that in effect. Other European countries have had really quick rises in nationalist sentiment. Portugal have the Chega party. They've just been absolutely flooded in a few short years.
Yeah, it's crazy what's happened in Portugal.
Yeah. I was really impressed by the Portuguese nationalist guys led by Afonso Gonçalves. They put on a really good conference last summer. There are a lot of guys behind the scenes that, don't get the clout and they don't get the attention online, but they're working diligently. They had a translation box there. It was very traditional, really rooted in Portuguese history. So I really enjoyed that one, and I'm hopeful about that movement. What other countries can I speak of? I mean, places like the Netherlands, I'm not so optimistic about. I've been alluding to this recently on my X. I think the Dutch are one of these Northwest European nations that have very neurological propensity to abstraction, systematizing capital. They were the first nation into capitalism in Europe, and I think when your society is like that, it's very hard to think in a national way and take heroic action to save the national blood.
Yeah, the lack of collectivism. But wouldn't that apply to the United Kingdom as well?
Yeah, exactly. I'm a little bit more optimistic about the UK. I think we're slightly less autistic than the Dutch, but I'm quite pessimistic about Northwest Europe in general, because I think the power brokers in society do just have this neurological profile. And they're just more concerned with abstract systems and capital than anything organic and real and familial. I live in Eastern Europe now. I've been in the Balkans for the last months and years, and people around here are just very different. They just think in very nationalistic, familial, even religious ways. People don't look at their phone as much. They don't care about capitalism as much. They're just a very social, real nation. And I kind of view my job as kind of teaching the lessons of the East to the West in many ways. Right. So I'm pretty optimistic about the south of Europe, and pretty pessimistic about the Northwest. And I think that's biological and neurological. And yeah, I'm trying to spread the word about that.
Raises a very terrifying potential where you could imagine part of Europe, and I've thought about this quite a bit, where you can imagine certain European countries turning to the right, having a real regime that actually starts seriously executing something like remigration, and then you have other European countries basically siding against it, saying that this is a betrayal of European values or whatever else. And rather than Europe rising as one to reclaim itself, so to speak, you essentially have this intra-European conflict where you'll have parts of the continent against other parts of the continent, even European governments fighting on behalf of non-Europeans and their right to live in Europe. This seems to be something, and you especially see this with the battles within the European Union. I mean, the European Commission seems to be just absolutely obsessed with the idea of making sure that not one European country will be allowed to defect from this population replacement agenda. I mean, look at how far they were willing to go over Hungary.
Yeah, the traditional power brokers in, Europe are France and Germany. They're both very far down the line in terms of replacement. Especially at the bottom of the population pyramid. And this is why I spend so much time talking about feminism and the lack of family formation. Because once the boomers die off, we're in a lot worse position in terms of our control of the population. So we do need things to shift quickly at the very top of Europe. And, the next 10 years are going to matter an awful amount. I think the problem with Germany is, it thinks in big ideas, it thinks in systems, and because of the outcome of World War II, they have adopted Karl Popper's ideology. It's been completely legally enshrined in Germany and in Europe. Many of the judges responsible for the laws that have brought over and, even legally protected refugees, so-called migrants that have done horrific crimes, are themselves German. Right. So we need to, get a shift in mindset at the very top. And I really hope they heed the warnings. And start to relent on this just, madness of racial egalitarianism and this. Yeah, I don't even know what to call it. It's just so.
Well, I think you kind of did with Karl Popper's and the Open Society. I mean, insofar as there's an ideological grounding for this whole thing, this idea that broadly defined, the purpose of politics, the purpose of society is to sort of liberate us from the stultifying hand of tradition. And therefore, we're going to be in the society where we're all individuals. And in practice, of course, what you get is what Marcuse called the liberating tolerance, where you have intolerance of ideas from the right and tolerance toward ideas from the left. And this is how it's always sold to us, right? I mean, everything is in terms of democracy, everything is in terms of human rights, everything is in terms of individualism. But in terms of the rights that you actually have, the things that people even 200 years ago could take for granted, at least in theory, coming out of the French Revolution or something like freedom of speech, something like the right to control your own property, something like, from a European perspective, if somebody invented this simple little device that could cool the air in your house when it's 200, I don't know the Celsius system, whatever stupid system you guys use over there. But, here in this country, we have air conditioning, and you have people in Europe saying, no, you're not allowed to do that because we have all these regulations and everything else. This is a level of micromanagement that goes beyond what I think the aristocratic tyrannies, if you can even use that word, of the 19th century that are put up to us as this great thing that we need to overcome. Like, there's less actual freedom in Europe now than there was 100 years ago. This seems clear. And yet it is still sold to us in terms of individual liberation. And people largely accept this. And I think it's because what they think of as liberation is basically the freedom to be leftist culturally. I mean, it's all tied up with sexual expression and profanity and just kind of these cheap emotional releases, as opposed to the liberty to actually build a family, have property, create a better world for your kids, be part of a legacy, as opposed to just kind of indulge yourself for a couple decades and die pointlessly. But maybe that's what people want. I mean, maybe that is the thing that a lot of us are sort of talking around, is that if you look at what democracy is, ultimately it has to be taken to the lowest common denominator. And if not just the lowest common denominator of the current population, but ultimately it's in the interest of the rulers to bring in people who are of the lowest common denominator globally, because those are actually the best constituents.
Yeah, I think it's basically to do with the emancipation of women, and then the post-World War II liberation of sex. And this has led to, the destruction of the family as the Marxists planned. And it's led to increasing feminine values within the bureaucracy. And it's all kind of been blended with this corrupt form of capitalism. And then the outsiders get brought in as this, labor force which crush wages and just empower the top 0.1%. And all the core values of the Western civilization, like the hero, patriarchy, the nuclear family, all these kind of values just get destroyed, into this, new alleged freedom, emancipation of, everyone to do as they wish in the moment. And, the West is ultimately based on a higher time horizon. As you say, it's about heroic legacy. But they still dare to co-opt the meaning of the West, and claim that they represent it. I think it's important we, talk about the true West, especially, the philosophy of Plato, etc., and how it's been replaced by the atomizing ideology of Karl Popper.
Yeah. Helen Andrews has written a lot about the way feminine values have corrupted all of these institutions. Of course, one could argue that the reason she could get away with this is because she's a girl writing this sort of stuff. If a man had written this stuff, it probably would have been ignored. But she's been doing it quite well, and it's had a big impact. The question then becomes, though, you get into a bit of a chicken and egg type problem, because people will say, well, you've got the feminization of all these institutions, so women are the problem. Women's liberation is the problem. But then you have to ask yourself, okay, well, what actually led to women's liberation? And furthermore, if you look at how women voted when they first could vote, they tended to vote for the conservatives, because women, generally speaking, and of course you can't help but speak in generalities, tend to support whatever the established power structure is, whatever the dominant social cues are. So to say that this is where it begins, you have to go a bit farther back. So the question is, how does one, but the problem is when you're in a democracy, by definition, you have to win the masses. So how do you reverse a power structure in a society when at this point, arguably the majority of people are going to follow the social cues coming from the top? I mean, it seems like democracy has sort of cracked the code of how do you have a system that fundamentally within its own mechanisms can never be changed.
Yeah, I think people are basically, what's the word? That they are instilled with a set of values, a system which, if they were to step outside, results in social ostracism. And, that includes men as well. So it's very difficult to create a majority when the nodes of social power are telling you that that is the most evil thing you could possibly do. And it's very difficult. I think, women are 52% of the voting public because they live longer. Estrogen basically makes them more communal in their thinking, especially before they've had children. They tend to view the outsider as, potentially part of their family and people they should care for. And, when you have feminine emancipation and, they enter sexual relationships which aren't secure, which don't necessarily keep them safe, they can become very spiteful about men. And then you get these sisterhoods forming that are anti-men in themselves. And it becomes very hard to propagate a value system based around true masculinity, because to many people, the traditional male or the white male is an enemy. And, the last 10 years of media really, really pushed the point that, like, the white man and his legacy is evil. What we have to do is basically show that we have a better system than the current one, with diligent media and propagating it in a diligent manner.
Well, if you look at the way women vote in the United States, and obviously that's the situation I know the best, married women actually vote for the right. So one could argue it's not really a gender gap, or at least in terms of the sorts of values, but it's sort of a marriage gap. Because once you, and again, if you look at, there's obviously some major racial distinctions here too. I know, and there's also, I should hasten to add, some demoralization propaganda out there, because you'll always see these sorts of things like, like white women are always into race mixing and everything else. And it's like, well, actually, if you look at the statistics, they're the least likely to do any of this. So you're just kind of making that up. And the bigger thing is when we talk about, media, they're getting these messages and stuff. To some extent, you could argue that, yes, there's a feminist agenda in media that is self-conscious, but who runs the media? It's not feminists, right? I mean, that's not the main thrust of it. The main thrust of it is obviously something bigger. But the question then becomes, how does one disrupt that? Because it seems like such a closed system. Do you take some hope from maybe the positive side of the negative phenomenon we talked about before, in that the media is breaking up because of social media, because of the internet, because it's simply no longer possible to just dictate an agenda from the top down in the way you could have in, say, 1950s, 1960s. As you point out, we're probably going to miss the boomers in some ways when they're gone, because they're like the demographic holding back the flood in some ways. But what is the most frustrating thing about boomers? The fact that they're the only people who still look at the TV and accept what the TV says the gospel. Nobody younger believes that anymore. And maybe there's an opportunity there.
Yes. I don't really like the white women race mixing the most doomer myths. Actually, the biggest risk of whites mixing is white male, Asian female. I think that's become very clear. To your second point, yes, there's a marriage gap. Women are very responsive to the peptide oxytocin, neuropeptide, I think it's called, oxytocin. And that's quite an interesting chemical, actually, because it makes people tribal. So an unmarried woman might be tribalized towards the sisterhood, but after she gives birth and gets a huge dose of oxytocin, she becomes more nationally tribal. So that would explain those kind of voting gaps. And, men should be aware of that, if you're a real man and you offer security, women are always attracted to safety. And once they're pregnant, you'll be surprised how quick their politics changes. And I've seen that with my older friends who have started off with a liberal woman, and they've ended up with a semi-aligned women who shares their concerns, shall we say. And to your last point, I think we should absolutely be very optimistic about the decentralization of media. Social media is just the start. It should be very obvious that Hollywood and Netflix and cable TV have had an enormous influence on people over the decades, and that will start to become democratized. And we've had two huge films that have dropped recently on tiny budgets. First one, Obsession, made by made on $750,000.
Something absurdly small, and I think it's going to make more money than Sinners now. Well, obviously it's going to make more money, right? But it's going to have greater box office receipts than Sinners, which of course was that black movie they just threw Oscars at and had a budget of God knows what.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically a critique of BPD women. That was my reading.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the thing. We could talk about that. I did a whole audio episode on Obsession. I mean, the funny thing about Obsession is it actually gets to your point, what you said before about the gender gap, whatever else, because you can, depending on who you are, man, woman, age, relationship status, whatever, you're going to get whatever you want to get from that movie. Like there's something you can take as confirmation of how you view this kind of stuff in there. And I think that's one of the things that made it so successful, is that because if you're a young guy, you're going to be like, yeah, this is this is how these foids are. But then, if you look at the way young women are talking about it, it's like, no, this is like how the nice guy thinks he's entitled to sex in a relationship, and actually it's all a trick and everything else. And there are a million other interpretations. There are religious interpretations. But I think that sort of builds to the larger point, which is the problem with not having a cohesive media environment is now there's no longer a shared narrative about anything, not even a stupid movie and like what it's supposed to be about, right? And the problem is, yes, we're breaking up the programming in the sense that there's no longer a dominant narrative from the top down saying white guilt, white guilt, white guilt. That has obviously been disrupted, but there's not a clear alternative. Instead, it's just sort of a choose your own adventure where you go down whatever rabbit hole you want. And that's fine as far as it goes, but it doesn't lead to a cohesive or effective political or cultural movement.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, democratized media has also an atomizing effect. But I remain optimistic about AI providing an opportunities for extremely low budget films, and basically the traditional values being re-injected into the minds of people and by extension the culture. I think people's value systems could look very, very different in 5 or 10 years, because the liberals have had such central control for all these decades, and now it's kind of descending into a chaos where anyone can kind of pick up the crown. We just need to be more organized in our opposition.
I cut you off before you were going to refer to another movie. I just want to make sure I didn't list that point. Were you going to refer to Backrooms as the other one that kind of stepped up out of nowhere?
I was just going to say Citizen Vigilante as well.
Oh, yeah. We probably should talk about that, because the director was on with my co-host Paul Kersey from View from the Right, and of course my boss, Jared Taylor, and he was on the American Renaissance podcast. Now, maybe he'll be on this show in a couple days. Who knows? But one of the criticisms, of course, is we're familiar with his career, or at least some of you guys out there are familiar with his career. And it's been checkered, at least critical in terms of critical reception. And there were a lot of people saying, well, this isn't the best movie and whatever else. Of course, what I would counter is that if you look at some of the films that have been put out, not just as good films, but as award-winning films, even if you have something like One Battle After Another, I mean, to me, the dialogue in that was unbearably cringe, just bad. Not, I ideologically disagree with this, but this is terrible. Like, where are people getting this from? And yet there's a sort of sense of, am I going insane? Because you're seeing critics praise it to the skies as the greatest and most inspiring thing ever. Is it not a question of, when you have somebody who's ideologically on board and it's got a mass audience, that you just sort of take the win? And if people don't like the specifics about how it's done, Well, now there's a market for it. It has been proven. So why wouldn't somebody step up with maybe a little bit better script and better editing and something and take it, and maybe something with a bit more subtlety and take it to the next level?
Yeah, I listened to Uwe Boll with your colleagues, and also he was on the show with us last night with Mark Collette. So I think he's an interesting guy. I mean, people are expecting him to be this kind of pre-made nationalist ideologue or something, as if he was going to, be one of us or something. But no, he made a film that brought attention to issues in Europe, particularly that people care about. I think he's a very typical German. He's obsessed with systems and justice, and he's made a few really good films, actually.
Yeah, he has. There are some he's made I've enjoyed. I mean, I've got to say something embarrassing. I didn't dislike the House of the Dead movies, I think, as much as like everybody else in the world did. But I mean, Rampage and Assault on Wall Street and stuff like that, they have their moments. I'll watch
exactly.
those.
I enjoyed Assault on Wall Street and another film, Darfur, very much. I think he's good at building emotional intimacy with his kind of handheld close-ups on faces, and builds tension well. Certainly not a terrible filmmaker. Citizen Vigilante wasn't as good as some of his other work, but it created a conversation. Musk co-opted it. He's probably going to make a lot of money from it. And if nothing else, it sends a warning to people, and hopefully it'll persuade people that we can't keep going down this path, and we need to change systems to something less violent, because he's basically talking about society in Europe fracturing and the potential for violence in future, and we're seeing it now. I mean, I called it 3 years ago that I thought we were at the point where there would be an increase in political violence, and it turned out I was a bit early. Prigozhin was the first to go at the hands of probably Putin, but we've seen a lot of political violence recently, and we need the power brokers of society to change course and stop it.
You talk a lot about systems, and I think I'm in total agreement with you about the distinction between German philosophy and English. I mean, one's reminded of what Nietzsche said: "A man does not strive for happiness; only the Englishman does that." And this sort of like Anglo, even though I'm fundamentally a product of the Anglosphere, like all Americans, there's definitely a party that's just like, ugh, like this kind of Anglo liberalism that was never good, and we need to look at these other sources and everything else. But at the same time, there's a kind of skepticism I have toward any system, because I think that ideology tends to follow interests. Like, why is Karl Popper's philosophy so dominant? It's not because it's so good or because it's so compelling. I think a child could see through the holes in it, but it's useful. In the same way that a lot of the ideas that we've been talking about for a long time in terms of individual liberation and sort of the bromides of liberalism, like freedom of speech, which don't even really exist anymore in Europe, but they still talk about it, they're useful. And they're useful because elites gain from people believing in these sorts of things. And the systems that win are not necessarily the systems that are the most intellectually sophisticated or the closest map to reality, but the ones that have the most money and power and influence behind them to propagate them. And so what we're really talking about is elite sponsorship. But as you pointed out, and I hope I'm not misquoting you here, but I think it was you who said it, that, okay, Elon Musk, like, you're promoting this movie that has this pretty radical message. Like, you realize there's a lot of stuff you could do with your resources that don't involve like telling people to go into the streets with guns, that would actually have some major returns. But you're not doing that, other than, I guess, supporting the Republicans. And Musk has already done way more than 99.9% of people out there. It's not a question of waiting for Wall Street traders or something to wake up to the idea of white identity or something, but there are a lot of just ordinary millionaires, wealthy people in the United States and the world. And if you look at the kind of things they do, a lot of them will do things like donate to their college basketball team. You just don't see them stepping up. maybe that is also downstream from this idea of individualism. But at some point, do we get anywhere unless you do get people like that willing to step up and actually contribute? Because God knows the left can count on that.
Yeah, I think. Well, I've started to become critical of Musk. I hope I don't get banned for it, but I keep calling him out like total donations to peaceful political nationalism, $0. I just think there's just a lot of boomerism, and the boomers essentially hold all the wealth in society. They've not participated in our movement. They've not seen the memes. They've not done the reading. And I think there's also this dynamic that when you get older, you start to fear death. You become more attached with religious ideas and, possibly leaning more towards Christian ideas. I've seen it in my own dad and, friends, fathers as well. But we need to kind of guilt these power brokers and wealthy people into the continuation of the blood and our nations. And we need to be better at, creating the entities, the organizations that can receive those donations in a way that doesn't put these people in the spotlight. We need to have better media and just make it as easy as possible for them. Because as you say, Jeff Bezos's ex-wife is busily engaged in funding every liberal project she can with $20 billion.
That dude's divorce is going to the amount of cumulative damage from Jeff Bezos's divorce is like unparalleled in human history. It's the most destructive divorce of all time. And it's funny, of course, because, what is he doing with his money? Is he's running around with his new girl on boats and stuff. Like, you can sort of see the difference in priorities there.
Yeah, and exactly. When men act badly and dishonorably, particularly when a woman feels betrayed, I've noticed that nearly every time she'll become radically aligned with further emancipation of women and liberal causes. So the worse men behave, the worse the problem gets. What was your other question on Germany or German philosophy? Sorry, I do.
Well, I agree. Right. Yeah, I was agreeing that there might be something inherent to the Anglo philosophy that all of us operate on, including here in the United States, which keeps people from recognizing even the very existence of collective interest. I mean, and as you say, there's also this sort of fetishism in the Anglosphere for legalism as such. In America, that's definitely this cult of constitution worship, where we all just kind of assume that the country is basically running the same way, that we're still basically under the same regime as the framers because we still have the same constitution. And that's what America is. It's the Constitution. You hear this explicitly, in fact, from a lot of movement conservatives, older movement conservatives will say America is the Constitution. We shouldn't even talk about culture or race or religion or any of these sorts of things. And even if you look at England, in many ways, it is very traditionalist in terms of its institutions. The king is still there. There's still a House of Lords. They still do all the ceremonies and uniforms running around and everything else. And yet, when you look at the substance, it's just a totally different place from what it was 100 years ago. It's a totally different form of government in any way that matters. But it's hard for people to recognize this, especially, it seems to me, in the English-speaking world. Whereas Germany, I mean, you can think of, how many different regimes would an elderly German have experienced if he died in 1993, right? I mean, he could have conceivably seen the Kaiserreich, Weimar, the Third Reich, East Germany or West Germany, depending on where he lived, and then a reunified Germany all within one lifetime.
Yes. I mean, I think the UK's problems really started in 1911. We had this... The aristocracy were kind of stripped of their power in the House of Lords. They were taxed more in order to pay for rearmament of particularly the Navy to match Germany's military buildup. And also we had the old age pension came into existence, which I think like kind of split up the family into different generations that were sustainable in their own right, rather than being a multi-generational family.
Yeah, that's definitely one of my more libertarian opinions. I agree with you on that. It's one of these things that electorally you could never get rid of it. It would be suicide to ever bring it up. They used to say Social Security, third rail of American politics, but like if you actually look at the long-term consequences, the whole idea that a family is generationally separated, it's actually really weird and ahistorical. Yeah. It didn't really exist until recently.
Yeah. And then, of course, 2 world wars followed. I think there was an issue with Germanism, German militarism. Bismarck turned that people into a military machine. I mean, my own great grandfather was Danish. He lost his homeland at the hands of Bismarck.
He was in Schleswig-Holstein.
Yes, he's from there. And yeah, I mean, we had 1870, Franco-Prussian War, 1914, 1939. So the settlement of the German question became Karl Popper. The Germans were guilted because of, their mentality, and, they basically became, the manufacturing heart of Europe, essentially, and they kind of have this new economic empire that stretches into the Balkans, and recently to Ukraine as well, you could argue. So yeah, I think often we kind of view history as this conspiracy, top-down conspiracy. I don't think it's always so like that. There are just a lot of kind of settlements that happen in the moment because of what's happened recently, and it's not well thought out. People are kind of bad at predicting the future outcomes, and they do things as necessary in the moment. I mean, another example would be the British Nationality Act of 1948,
oh, God. Yeah,
which came as a result of Canada wanting more recognition as a sovereign state, which then led to a legal crisis in the UK, wanting to maintain a soft empire, even though the writing was on the wall that we would not be able to, enforce a hard empire. And then that led to the unintended consequences of, mass immigration to the UK. And it became, it just went through this inertia. It was supercharged at, 97, 2020, and now we're just in great peril, and people don't want to admit the mistakes that were made in the past, and the system just continues, and there's never any turning back. And I think again there's this neurological problem within, especially Northwest Europeans. We're very dopaminergic, and we like to march forward into the future and believe in progress. And believe that we solved all the problems of the past, but yeah, in the process we're losing the real foundational values that are kind of subtle, and people don't notice.
Right. That's why you need a Dago like Evelyn to say something like "There's no idea as foolish as the idea of progress." An Anglo would never figure that out.
Exactly. We love our Italians.
We love our Italians, don't we, folks? Even though you're all going to have to deport me once we actually settle our business here. But that's fine. Anybody with a vowel at the end of his name has to go. But I accept that. I understand that. If you think about, I mean, to me, I'm really impressed that you brought up that act in 1948, because when I opened my eyes to that one, it was like a thunderclap, because in some ways it's more comforting to believe that there was an explicit nefarious agenda for key pieces of legislation. For something like the Hart-Celler Act, I know some people say like, oh, Ted Kennedy said it would be nothing. It's like, yeah, but if you look at who was actually mobilizing for it, at least some of the people who were drafting it, at least some of the people who pushed for that act knew what it was going to do, were doing it on purpose. This was something done with an agenda. But you look at that act and how that totally revolutionized the United Kingdom, there was almost no serious thought about its consequences. They just kind of did it and had this sort of wishful thinking about what it all meant. And as you point out, the things that inspired it had like nothing to do with its long-term importance. How much of the crisis that we're in happened really because of just a refusal to think, not because of a nefarious agenda?
Yeah, I mean, Clement Attlee didn't even mention it in his memoirs,
right.
or barely did. You know, a lot of these things are just not thought out, and they're semi-accidental. And as soon as that law came into effect, or even possibly slightly before, a bunch of Jewish merchants that had bought up the ships of the British Empire, started selling tickets to Caribbeans to come to the UK. And when
that's where Windrush, right?
Yeah, and when they turned up, people didn't know what to make of it. 11 Labour MPs wrote to Clement Attlee and said this is not going to fly. Jewish businesses hired those people and started integrating them. So I think, they as a political force did had some mind to creating a new post-world order. But many of the bureaucrats don't even think like that.
Right.
So yeah.
It's like they open the door and then unknowingly, and then the people who have a malicious intent now have an opportunity they wouldn't have had if somebody had just had 5 minutes of forethought.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of these laws are drafted with, good intentions, let's say, but then there'll be a small amendment which to a Jewish jurist will have massive implications further down the line. And it's this kind of attritional battle. But, it escapes the notice of certainly the general public and even the lawmakers responsible. And I think another big problem with the UK is the wages for the members of parliament are such low compensation that we just have a general competency crisis now. And they're not trained lawyers. They get their ideology from Netflix, quite literally, in the case of recent productions.
Adolescence is the bedrock of the British education system, that film Adolescence, right?
Yeah. And the Parliament will just respond to the latest trends on Twitter, or the latest hit on Netflix. It's just a total reaction to slop. It's just totally unserious, and people are looking at this, but they don't know how to affect change because things are so far gone. Can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. I mean, the new vehicle is a combination of reform and restore.
Right. That was what I really wanted to hit on, because look, let's be honest. I think maybe a month or two ago, everybody was really pumped up and everybody had this sense of like, okay, this is serious. We're all kind of pushing in the same direction here. This is what's going on. Now it's sort of chaos where you have kind of a fight within Restore about some of the stuff that Rupert Lowe has said, where he's saying, well, I'm not in support of ethno-nationalism. I think what he actually said was considerably stronger. You have Reform and you have Nigel Farage clearly seeing the threat to his right and trying to swing right and say, no, I'm going to do more about these sorts of issues and everything else. At the same time, we all know the problems with Farage. We all know the problems with Reform and the types of people who they are bringing in to be candidates, not just members of the party. And the question of, well, what's the point of the government, even if they get elected, if it's just going to be this stuff again? But I think a lot of people are focused on two key considerations here. One, what exactly is the difference between Restore and Reform at this point? I mean, is it just a question of it's Lowe versus Farage? Or do you think that there is, because you would know more about this than I do, or do you think that, no, this is still something that has to happen and is inevitable, is going to happen? And then two, especially when you look at the fact that they're going to have a new prime minister and Labor maybe is going to be a bit resurgent under it, what exactly is the economic answer of these parties? Because let's face it, most people vote based on the economic things. And if you just say, look, vote for us and we'll get all these packies out, A lot of people might say that's great, but if labor comes along and says we're going to tax the rich and give you all their money, white working class guy might be more likely to go with that.
Yeah, so the left is kind of rallying around wealth taxes and Andy Burnham. Yeah, I mean, they're going to become a big talking point because of the nature of capitalism and the accumulation of assets. And I think that's a conversation that needs to be had.
I agree.
I mean, Burnham is also talking about a massive legal devolution, which I think could probably turn out really badly because it will lead to an invigoration of clannish politics in different regions and a balkanization and a lack of expertise and an increase in predatory capital. So you'll start to see these different suburbs get to be taken over by entire ethnic groups, and they'll start to put funding into their causes and things like that.
Couldn't that work to our advantage, though, as well? I mean, you could imagine certain nationalist redoubts taking advantage of it under such a program.
Possibly. I just think that the less expertise you have, the more trouble that will occur. And I think there is a narrow window to save the system, which, restore our focus on from a national perspective and reform our focus on from a multiracial economic perspective. So, yeah, reform basically have a lot of funding from capital. Farage was given a £5 million donation with no strings attached, allegedly, by an offshore resident to come back to politics. They've got real estate funding, North Sea oil funding, these different types of capitalists. But the agenda, whilst it will probably take the pressure off white people from a legal perspective, they do plan to repeal certain laws and make it. Farage basically wants to return back to Martin Luther King values. I predicted it before he said it. He actually said it on a public video a week or two ago. So reforms see the way the UK is going, and they're trying to, create the cope that the boomers will vote for, better run economy, more fairness, blah, blah, blah. But Restore have a more national agenda. And as you say, we've got boomer Rupert Lowe as the iconic figurehead. And then we've got more radical people below him. So, yeah, I mean, the way the ecosystem is now online is if ever Lowe does a boomerism, it gets clipped and then it gets shared on X, and then there's a crisis. Oh, are we wasting our time because this is no different from Farage? But I think we've just got to trust in what's already been said, the policies that have already been tabled, and the good people that are involved in the Restore vehicle. So I'm aligning myself with them. I'm encouraging people to get involved. And there are a lot of good, intelligent people involved in the party and will be involved in the party. And, we're going to have a go at creating something meaningful and saving our national homeland. And I get the sense that a lot of people outside the UK are rooting for us because, Britain is a special place and it's had so much influence on the world, and people don't want to see it disappear.
Right. Well, I guess that would be the last question then. Where do you see this going? Because Labor does have some time here. They don't have to call an election until 2029. Do you think that whatever they're going to push is going to disintegrate by then? So when you do get the next general election, you'll have the critical opportunity. Because as you say, I mean, there is a time limit to this. It's not like there's 20 years where you can wait to build up like a new political movement. It's going to be settled one way or the other, probably within the next 2 decades.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether Burnham will try to call a snap election and gain a mandate to make, what will be sweeping changes by the sounds of it. But whatever he attempts, I think it will fall flat, and people are just too exposed to poor living conditions, unfairness, violence, waste, and our treasure being redirected to new arrivals, let's say, and people are just not able to live a comfortable life. And I think Reform are still the favourite to win the next election. I think they will continue to become more radical because they are being outflanked by the Restore vehicle. But at the end of the day, Reform, whatever Reform do, will basically be a trick for the purposes of capitalism, for the purposes of Zionism. Those figures are running the show.
I take it no prospect of a Reform Restore coalition anytime soon, huh?
Well, I don't think it's impossible, and maybe we'll get some kind of deal where Restore will accept a free run at certain target seats in exchange for not running in others. We might see something like that. Because I think, the same thing applies on the left. You've got the Labour and the Greens who are going to be splitting the vote between their two versions. But I think what Burnham's proposing now will probably outflank the Greens because he's going to go more economically left. And the Greens won't be offering anything particularly different. So, yeah, I think it's basically Labour versus whatever the right can conjure up. And I remain hopeful that the right can get in power and make changes. But yeah, I mean, it's very late in the day. And there are 18 million people that are, not aligned with the survival of the British nation. From a biological perspective, it's in their interest if the white hegemon is disempowered. So, I wish this could have all happened much earlier, but we've got to do our best and act in a heroic way. As Spengler says, the Roman at his post in Pompeii, as it were.
Yeah, nice fatalistic, depressing thing to end it on. Nonetheless, though, that is the way forward. So, where can people find you and how can they support you?
I'm on X at Nativist Concern, also on Telegram under the same tag. My main project at the moment is Continuum with Keith Woods. That's posted on Europa, on X, also on Rumble. Keith Woods' channel and Substack. Please watch and share. And I'm really keen to push these ideas that I feel have been neglected from a nationalist perspective. Things like neurology, psychology, some deeper view of economics and philosophy. So, thank you for having me on, and thank you for the support. And wish you all the best of luck with your own projects as well.
All right, thanks for being on. And as you say, politics is, well, as I always say, but I think you'd agree, politics is biological, and it's important that these ideas are getting out there. There's a deeper problem here when we talk about immigration policy, because on the one hand, we've actually come so far. Think of John Kasich and how utterly irrelevant he seems today, babbling about the need for more Haitians. Think of the policy victories we've had. That's not nothing. But what difference does it make unless you have someone like President Trump literally in charge forever? That's kind of the undercurrent of this whole situation, because even if you get these policy changes, even if you win some of these victories at the Supreme Court, and even if now you're legally allowed to get rid of a lot of these people, on a long enough timeline, you could do some incredible things. And some people are already talking about what could be done. including people who aren't happy about it. So NPR, for example, whines. As Supreme Court expands Trump's immigration power, experts warn of steeper U.S. population decline. Quote, and remember, always have your guard up once you hear the term experts. Quote, this kind of opposition to both legal and illegal immigration is now widespread among conservatives, said Cato's David Byer, who worked as a Republican congressional staffer on immigration policy. That explains a lot, doesn't it? He told NPR that when he talks to conservatives about the economic and demographic risks of closing the country's doors to migrants, many answer with a cultural argument. They would rather have a declining population of true Americans than have an economy kept afloat by people who don't share their values, Byer said. Hell yeah. But if extremely low or zero-level immigration does become the new normal for the U.S., experts say it would swiftly remake the fabric of the country. The Census Bureau estimates that without robust migration in the coming years, total population loss by the end of the century could exceed 107 million people, unquote. God almighty. Can you imagine what a paradise we would live in? Like, what problems would we even have? And by the way, like, oh, the birth rate is so low. Yeah. Immigration from the third world reduces the native birth rate. Why? Because as the population increases, housing becomes more unaffordable, education becomes more expensive, you get more crime, you get less land, the quality of life declines. If all those things go away, all those things become better. Like, oh, it's a low birth rate. You stop letting in the migrants, I promise you, people are going to start having more kids. They'll actually have a stake in the future. Right now, you don't. But we could talk about all this we want. We can get pumped up by it, but what does it matter? Here's the reality. And I don't like this, but this is the reality. Right now, President Donald Trump is historically unpopular. GOP is probably going to go into a buzzsaw in the midterms. 2028 is too far away to freak out about. But what's going on is not about immigration. It's not even really about Iran, other than with gas prices. Most people don't care. It's about the economy. It's about the cost of living. And immigration affects that, but you need to practically abolish our whole system of government if you want to do mass deportations at the pace required for people to notice the impact quickly. And here's the problem. When the Democrats get in, they're just going to give all these people citizenship. And then what was the point of all this? I mean, really, this is a systemic crisis because we're at the point now where democracy is over. Because at least one party knows its path to power depends upon replacing the actual population, and the other is at least beginning to sense that its survival depends on stopping this process. And so once you have an existential dispute like that, what is there to discuss? What common interest do we even have? At some point, someone on the left or the right is going to cut the Gordian knot of this failed system and impose a solution, and that side's going to reign for a generation. And Trump won't be the guy to do it, but he's the guy who at least has made the choice clear. It's going to be one of you guys who gets to wield that sword. Better be anyway, or it's going to be someone on the other side wielding it against you. You can't have a democracy when the very nature of the nation is in question. We're already past that point. Start thinking about what the future looks like and how we get there. We'll do that here. I'm Kevin DeAnna. We'll talk again soon. All right, guys, that's it for today's episode of Identity Politics. If you found this valuable and you want to see more of this kind of work, here's how you can help. First, follow the show and share it with people who need to hear it. We're on Rumble, Odyssey, YouTube, X, TikTok, and you can also grab the RSS feed. Sharing it is the fastest way for us to grow. Second, sign up for our email list so we can always stay in direct contact no matter what the platforms decide. And most importantly, if you believe in our mission and want to keep it going, please consider supporting us on Ko-Fi. You can donate once or subscribe at the bronze, silver, gold, or white level. Every contribution, big or small, helps keep Identity Politics independent and alive. All the links are in the description below. Thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting. We'll see you next time.